Welcome back to A People's Guide to Publishing. I'm Joe Beal, the founder and CEO of Microcosm Publishing and Distribution. I'm also the author of A People's Guide to Publishing, which distills what I've learned from selling millions of books over the past 25 years.
I'm Ellie Blue. I'm the editorial and marketing director here at Microcosm. We are an independent mid-list publisher based in Portland, Oregon. We have 14 employees, over 650 titles in print with 20 to 40 new books per year, and we distribute thousands of titles from other publishers.
We started this podcast so that we can share what we've learned with newer publishers so that you can learn from our mistakes.
Or maybe you just want to understand the publishing industry.
Aiden has a brand new book with Microcosm called do I get to be the one to say it, or do you want to say it?
Should we say it together?
Yes, we can say it together.
1, 2, 3. Even
Cowbots
get blue balls. Did anyone understand?
Great title.
Fabulously disastrous. Whose title was that?
Yeah, it wasn't mine. I sent it in. The only chance in and other stories. This is much better.
Oh yeah, we kind of have that way, and then if nobody says no, things tend to get increasingly ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But
I'm all for it.
See, and this is why you are the perfect author for Microcosm, is because we're like, we have a really racy idea, and you're like, I'm all for it.
It doesn't totally make sense. It doesn't totally match what's inside the book, but it's pretty fun to say.
Yeah. Well, it's like Cowbot is like the ship name because it's cowboy and robot. They're different characters, but that's like, it's like Brangelina or whatever. See? So it totally makes sense.
That's how I thought of it too. You're like looking at the tone or like the summation of the piece. You're not like giving away the plot.
Mm-hmm.
I did make a somewhat horrifying discovery recently, which is there is a children's book series about a cowbot. When you look up cowbot in Edelweiss, that's what comes up.
Well.
Sorry, kids. Or you're welcome, kids. You got to grow up someday. The series will continue. You don't have to give up on what you loved as a child.
I mean, it could be worse. At least I don't actually write children's things under that name. I heard a story once from Ursula Vernon about an incident she had and why she uses a pen name for the adult ones now.
One of our other queering consent authors is in a similar boat where they were like, how do I keep these two worlds separate? And we were like, we think separate is good. As separate as you can make it.
I mash it all together because it's all for grown-ups. Not all of it has sex in it. I've got the vampire story that is from Thurston Howell Press that does not have anything steamy, but it's still it's still all for grown-ups. So
have you gotten any complaints about that?
There's
no sex.
That was not. No, I haven't. But I don't really. I'm not in a fame place where I like run into people who know who I am or anything. Like most of the people who buy that book are people who know me and know that I write every weird thing under the sun. So.
Well, that'll be a milestone you can look forward to.
When I get recognized somewhere. I did get recognized at a My Little Pony convention once for the fan fiction. That's my claim to fame. Is just somebody knew who I was because I wrote a fan fiction.
Nice.
Awesome.
Nice.
Well, that's a good segue into our first question, which is, can you tell us how you got started writing?
Well, actually, my very first piece of writing ever was fan fiction. I was 6 years old, and I was very into Care Bears.
Yes.
So I wrote and illustrated a book, and I bound it together with, like, yarn ties along the edge and everything about Care Bears who were sharing balloons with each other. So that was my intro.
And the rest is history.
Yeah. No, I always read voraciously. Loved stories, and you fill your brain up with stories, and stories come out. So,
yeah, wow, that's awesome. And then, so And then it's clear that you've pursued this excitedly into adulthood. So how do you sort of envision, or I mean, I guess nobody can plan their life, but how did you envision arriving where you would be at your age now as a writer?
Oh, when I was younger, I did not envision where I was going to be now. My life has not gone to plan. I was going to do the bland, straight white picket fence thing, get married, I'd have 4 kids by now, blah, blah, blah. None of that. None of that happened. I mean, I did get married, I do have a kid, but not, it's not very straight. The Queering Consent series is great for me because I'm hella queer, so.
That's good. I mean, and it's well, would anybody want their life to go the way they thought it would when they were 6?
Oh, goodness. I mean,
Well, I would have been an
maybe a few
astronaut.
people, but yeah. When I was 6, I was going to be an artist, and I meant fine arts and gallery art. So I've kind of gone in that direction somewhat because I create, I make things, I write things, adjacent. Good enough.
Would you say how would you describe, I guess, the style of your writing?
I'm pretty sure that one of my biggest influences was Mercedes Lackey. The kind of a little bit pulpy, mostly wholesome, kind of weird, only more often X-rated. I don't think very many Lackey books have X-rated, but a few of them do, but mostly no. So
Mercedes and I have run-ins on Quora periodically, and it is it's I feel like if you brought that up, you could get a pretty wild bit of exposition, how that happened, and why that doesn't happen more often, and what the feedback was. Or speaking of mixing your pen name with your real name, or why people change pen names for their smut.
Yeah. I know most people do, but I'm just a little weird that way. I've never been able to. It's not a hard boundary, is the other thing. I mean, when I was growing up and reading science fiction and fantasy off the shelves in the library that my parents let me read as a teenager because they assumed if it was in the library it was fine, I read a lot of sex, okay? There's a lot of sex scenes in those books. So it's not a firm boundary. I mean, even the one I say, the vampire one that's not very steamy, there is a sex scene in that. It's just not especially explicit. 2 of the characters get together, but
people have sex. It's part of life.
Yeah, exactly. It's not something you can cordon off somewhere else entirely because it's not some other thing entirely. It's just a thing people do.
And so I mean, and this is sort of the thing where how did you, was it that trip to the library, or trips, I'm guessing, to the library, that made you interested in writing these stories, or what sort of motivated that in your brain?
Part of the reason why I started getting a little more serious about writing was actually an English teacher I had in middle school. We did a unit on fiction writing, and where we were all supposed to turn in a story, and I turned mine in 3 weeks late because I had gotten so elaborate with it that it was, I mean, in retrospect, it was probably 2,000 words, but for me at the time, it seemed like this monstrous novel. Oop, my thing is going off there. And anyways, and she gave me an A+ on it because she was like, I don't care that it's late. You put so much passion into this, and this is so great, and someday you're going to be an author. Yes. And I actually dedicated my first published book to Mrs. Murdoch, who told me I was going to be an author. She was great. And so it was a story about unicorns, and I was very interested in writing fantasy fiction. I've always been interested in just, I live in this world. And this world has interesting stories that you can keep entirely in this world. But if I'm going to write something fictional, why stick with this world? Let's bring on the Cowbots, etc.
So when you are writing fantasy, I feel like it's always really interesting to me when I read fantasy, which I love to do, to be like, what is the
Mm.
actual fantasy going on here? You know, like, is the actual fantasy about meeting a dragon, or is the actual fantasy
Right.
about like being kidnapped by the dragon and being totally powerless and someone comes and saves you? You know, so like I'm and sometimes it's like you can look at it and be like, wow, this author has some fantasies that I don't share, and other times you're like, wow, this is what I really crave too. But yeah, like, what is the fantasy in your behind your fantasy, I guess?
Um, I think a lot of it has to do with kind of the sense of, well, the sense of the other, right? We have this ordinary life where we're all supposed to be ordinary humans and we're all supposed to be kind of alike and we're all supposed to fit into some mold and we're all supposed to fit into some, some gender, some nationality, some identity, whatever. And then when you don't, and you feel on the outside, and so then I write these stories, and it particularly with the romance stories and the smut stories and all that. But what it's really about in the fantasy for me is to take an ordinary person and connect them to the other, to have the romance happen. Between the cowboy and the robot, between the vampire and the hipster in Portland, between whoever else. These characters who are so different and who are other and who are not maybe what you expect can connect, can love each other, can find common ground, and maybe they just fuck one night, whatever. But there's something there, and that's really my fantasy. Like, I am a person who wants to connect to people. Right? I'm a little introverted. I want to stay home most of the time, but I need, you need people. And so my fantasy is just about these ways that people can interact and connect and find things to experience together. I don't know.
I love that fantasy. I noticed in a lot of the stories in Cowbots, like, also the people that are the other, like, maybe you don't notice at first that they're the other. Like, maybe you think they're just like you, but then they turn out to be different than you thought in ways that are very exciting and sexy. Um,
And that's certainly another thing that just comes from my experience. Growing up, I was, like I say, I was expecting the white picket fence. I was gonna be, cute little cute little bride in my white dress and do all that traditional girl stuff, and then that I found out I was something not quite like that.
and look
That
at the
I've
result, much more exciting.
Yeah. And so I mean, the discovery element is definitely another thing I really like. Self-discovery, finding out that the world isn't what you expect. It's always kind of fun to write the character, and I don't always get that point of view because the story works for other reasons, but when you get the ordinary person who suddenly realizes that, holy shit, vampires are real or whatever else, that moment is just excellent.
Yes.
I mean, the thing that I find fascinating about this is like, we all explore themes because of like our own experiences, but you've taken this from like you wanting to find like understanding and acceptance to like making sort of all these other people find understanding and acceptance in your stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and, I write a pretty broad variety of things, and sometimes it's just you get an idea, and the idea just wants out, and you want to do something weird. What if this? What if that? What if the other? And I have written some that are not with Microcosm, where acceptance doesn't happen and things go badly and they're terrible. Writing horror is very cathartic, by the way. Horror story is fantastic for when you're having a bad day. Just go make terrible things happen to fictional people. Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, I honestly think my favorite thing to write is where people get, they get their happy ending. And not Disney happy ending where it's too perfect to be real, but a happy ending you can believe in. You know? The robot dude doesn't get his problems fixed in the story. Nothing gets magically solved. But he needs a nice cowboy. It's alright.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, and it's just like then it kind of feels more ironically realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Even though
Yeah.
like a lot of the themes are, well, we don't need to spell that one out.
So this podcast is ostensibly for publishers about publishing. So I like to always get into the weeds a little bit with process. Very fun when we do these interviews. You've published with some seriously small presses, and you write about this a little bit more in your interview on our blog, which people can also go read. Yes, Joe is gesturing to show how small a press can be. And then you've worked with us, who we were once small, and now we are approaching medium-sized rapidly. We're still
All
small.
relative.
Yeah, we're still tiny in the world of publishers, but not as
Yeah.
tiny as could be. And yeah, we would love to hear kind of about your different perspectives and experiences in not just working with those publishers, but in interacting with like any readers that found you through those publishers.
Honestly, it's a funny thing because, when you hang around in writer circles, you hear everybody like complain about the submissions process, and how hard it is to find a publisher, how hard it is to find an agent, how just soul crushing and terrible it is, and they got a point. I used to say, well, then I'm just not interested in being published. I'll just write for me. I'll just keep them. They just won't go anywhere. I'll put them in a stack. It's fine. Um, but the urge to share is impossible to resist. And I posted some online. And actually, my first publishing contract, I was approached by a publisher.
Nice.
Which Cinderella story there, like that never happens. But it's because the publisher was one guy. His name's JF Coates. He's from Australia, and he wanted to start up a furry themed publishing company, which is, that's a niche of a niche, because the furry is small and publishing in furry is even smaller. It's teeny. And he read a story I wrote about dragons that he really liked, and I had posted part of it online, and was like, dragons are furry. Can I publish your furry dragon thing? And he didn't end up with the dragon thing because it wasn't actually finished. I'd published a part 1, and I still haven't written the rest of it. Sometimes that happens. But he was, I had all this other stuff I've been sitting on for years, and I'm like, ooh, here, have some stories. And I sent him a whole heap of things, and ended up publishing a collection called The Garden Maze of stories about just fantasy beings and, animal people and dragons. And the titular Garden Maze is about a gardener who is a half elf and half orc, and has to go on a quest to save the earth, which she thinks means the planet, but it turns out means like soil and earth and gardening stuff. Like it's this pun. It's kind of a stupid little story, but I still like it. You like your old ones even when they're a little dumb. But it was just this fascinating, weird experience, because I was like getting published, and it was all for real, and it was this whole thing, but it was also some guy with a computer making ebooks to sell to furries in Australia. I mean, I think I made $20 off of all my royalties on that, and that's not because he gave me terrible terms. It's just because sold 15 copies.
Right.
So
Yeah, I've met a lot of authors that I think a lot of it is that you approach it with such a great attitude, because I cannot tell you how many authors that I've met are like, I got an offer and I got an agency to review my offer, and then I published this book, and then I put like so many years of my life into this thing, and then I find out the publisher has no distribution, so like it will basically never be found.
yeah.
And that's more typically the type of horror story I am told. Or
Well,
like,
what happens? That's what happens. There's a statistic that something like 99% of books sell. It's under 1,000 copies. It might even be under 100 copies. It's I forget where the math goes, but it's not very many.
We just did an episode about that. If any viewers want to check that
out. I don't know. There's a lot of books out there, and there's only so much, people buying books to go around, although some people could certainly stand to buy and read more books than they do. I think I'd do okay. We have a library downstairs, and I mean a library. We have a lot of books. We're book people.
Oh, but that's kind of the thing is like I think I would assert that what is different about it is how you're approaching it, where you're not coming in with
Right.
colossal expectations or like
Well,
this idea that you would walk away from your job.
oh, God, I had I used to say friend, and now I say guy I used to know because this turned into a disaster. He quit his job to write his novel.
Oh no.
Ugh, don't quit your job to write your novel, please, please don't. He used up all his savings, spending a year writing the book, and then it never got published, and he was not gracious about it. It was a disaster in my friends' circle that, ugh. But I think part of the thing is a lot of authors have like their baby, right?
Yeah.
The book they've thought about their whole life, the one story that encompasses everything they want to do, and I don't know why, but I don't have my baby. I have written literally millions and millions of words across many different genres. I have constant new ideas. I have an ideas file because I want to write all these stories and I like feel guilty if I have an idea and then I ignore it. So I write it down for later. Later never happens. The ideas file is 10,000 words long right now, and that's mostly a sentence at a time. I don't have my baby. I have everything under the sun. So if one of them doesn't get read, the garden maze and the cute little gardener gal who saves the earth got read by 20 people. That's fine. That's 20 people. I've got another one. What else do you want? What's your poison? I'll send you a story. I've got lots.
Well, we actually do have some requests. We recently talked to some high school librarians who run a spicy romance novel book club for their students, which this is not a district in Virginia, by the way, or Texas.
I know this sounds like a setup for a novel.
I know, right? But they said that their main problem is not like angry parents, but the fact that they cannot find enough lesbian vampire novels for their students to read. So,
noted in vampires.
Get to work.
We told them we'd work on it.
Yeah. I have lesbian vampires, but it's My Little Pony fiction. So
Maybe acceptable.
there's a weird one for you.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where high school students these days fall on My Little Pony fan fiction. We're a little too old to really be in touch with that demographic.
I was
learn
one.
daily.
We went to one of the comic book conventions once where we had a booth, and I was made fun of for not knowing what MLP stood for.
Oh, goodness. I try to remember to spell it out because I know not everybody's going to recognize the acronym, but I forget sometimes because in certain circles it's obvious and automatic, and what else would it stand for?
I mean, and I grew up with My Little Pony, but I still would never think of MLP as being My Little Pony.
Yeah.
You know? It's just like, and then it's like the other thing that is just like super weird where anything from your childhood comes back and you're like, ow.
Yeah.
You did this.
Well, it's always nice when they do something good with it, because honestly, the Friendship is Magic show was very good. Like, I have no weird feels about that. Brony culture is weird. Mostly great people, very strange, but
Well, maybe your lesbian vampire MLP fiction is going to be, the next big thing.
Yeah, who knows?
The next good thing.
Somehow I doubt it.
Well, we are close to the end of our time. Is there anything else that we want to talk about?
Yeah, so I heard a rumor that you have another new book coming out.
Oh, yeah.
Mostly from emailing with you.
We might even have a working title for it. Do you remember what it is?
All right.
You want to do your big reveal?
Yeah, my next collection is going to be leaning even further into the other thing, and I think we're calling it, what was it, Monster Fucking?
Monster Fucker, maybe?
Monster fucker.
Give the reader something to identify with.
Yes. It's quite fun. I have actually finished several of the stories that are going in it.
Awesome.
There's one that is a riff on Lovecraft that would have actual Lovecraft spitting in his grave, let me tell you. But
good.
What era of Lovecraft would be upset about this?
Yeah.
Like early, because Lovecraft had a few pivots in his career. It was like he was like, "Wait a minute, I was wrong about that." So maybe you can give him one more.
Yeah, maybe he'd have come around to the monster fucking, but it is that vibe of the weird little seaside town where something's not quite right, and there's a fellow who's a monster hunter, and he finds a monster, but not quite how he expects. It's a great story. So
I'm excited to read this.
I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Well, we can't wait to see it, and if it's half as fun to read as it is to write, then I know we'll be in good hands.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for having me on to talk about my weirdness. It's been great fun.
It's normalness around here, so
true.
You're mainstream now.
Yeah, thanks for fitting in with the in crowd.
Yes, but thanks so much for coming and joining us and telling the world about your books.
Yay, thank you.
Thanks for joining us once again.
Please send your questions to podcast@microcosmpublishing.com so we can answer them on future episodes.
And please give us 5 stars on iTunes and everywhere else that podcasts are reviewed.
You can find us on the internet at microcosm.pub.
On Twitter at Microcosm.
On Facebook at Microcosm Publishing.
On Instagram at Microcosm_pub.
And here in Portland, Oregon on North Williams Avenue.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful week.